You can't show that by a series of one step and another step. For example, we have a mechanism that I'm thankful for, blood clotting. Okay, what would happen if you cut your finger and no blood clotting?
You just keep bleeding.
You'd bleed out, right? Or what happened if your blood clotting mechanism, your blood clottingness, technical I know, worked too well? You get strokes or things like that. And so the answer is, here's just a simple mechanism in the body. Actually, there are hundreds of systems that work together to make all that happen. And you take one of them away, it doesn't work. How can that happen? By natural progression. And so, actually, we haven't even got to my napkin yet. But the question you've asked is simply this, that is there a reason to believe in God? And I'm saying, yeah, there actually is. And it's more rational to believe in God than not believe in God. And I can go on and never get the sermon. And so...
we don't want that.
We don't want that. And so I want you to think about your napkin, and I draw a little X in there or a plus sign or whatever it is, across. And
I just want to point out how low-tech this is.
Yeah.
And we've got an iPad.
I use the napkin. Scott uses the iPad.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Are you suggesting I'm simple? And
no.
Anyway.
But that's pretty irreducibly
First thing we talked about, we need to
complex.
start. First word I want you to write on your napkin, or you can use your bulletin if you want, is the word God. Most people believe in God. Actually, it's rational to believe in God. But I want to suggest three things that you need to know about God. The first one I bet you know already. And the first one is God is love. And so I just write God on here, and I did actually, and write the word love because God's love. And most people believe that. We can read Scripture, God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him because God is love. Or we can even quote John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. God's love. And most people, in fact, can I just see your hand? Do you believe God's love? Raise your hand high. Okay. We do. We believe that. But I've got to tell you, most people have a mistaken understanding about God. God is love, but God is not only love. In fact, most people think God is love, and they think God's only love. And they kind of have this picture of God. He's grandpa. Long beard, cane, and I don't know if, something happens. Grandparents, there's a switch that must go off in your head when you become grandparents because you treat your grandchildren way different.
See, I can totally attest to this. We have a couple of kids, and my parents were really, really very, very strict. I'm grateful for that, but they've switched teams now.
They've switched teams.
They have. They are on the kids' side now, and so they are the ones protecting my kids from punishment if... There's a difference.
So grandparents, I don't know what happens, but you treat your grandkids way different than you did your kids. And most people think that way about God. Oh, God's his grandpa, and you could do no wrong, and he switches sides, on the kid's side. And no matter what you do, your grandpa's just going to forgive you. And I want to tell you, guess what? God is love. But if you think God is only love, you've got a misconception about God. Because God is not only love. If we describe God's characteristics, God is also a holy God. Now, not like genes with, holy, H-O-L-Y. He's absolutely pure. He's completely separate. The one who's called you is holy. So you be holy in all you do. Be holy because God is holy. And it's a word we need to understand. And
I just have this feeling that there's a Greek or Hebrew lesson
it's like
coming.
You think I know every Greek word in the, or something.
Well, yeah, I
so
kind of have that
audios,
impression.
Holy. I'd love to give you, actually I would. I'm not going to though. The New Testament, okay, very...
Because we talked him into it. You saw that, right? So you're compelled to do it.
In the New Testament, the New Testament is one, you've heard me say this before, the New Testament is 1/4 of our Bible, and yet written in Greek, a very precise language, 160,000 different Greek words. And so I can stand up and tell you all these different words for love, and here's what love means, and all that kind of stuff. That's New Testament. Very, very precise, and so you can have different words with different meanings and nuances. The Old Testament, 3/4 of our Bible, can't believe you talked me into this, is Hebrew. Hebrew is a very imprecise language. In fact, although it's 3/4 of our Bible, there are only 40,000 different Hebrew words. And so Hebrew has a great big vast, you can mean love and you can mean hate and use the same word. In fact, no adjectives or adverbs in Hebrew. Old Testament story, I bet you know it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You heard this one? The earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God roamed over that. You heard a lot. God goes into his creative powers, and he starts creating things. And he steps back and says, that's good. He creates all the animal life, the plant life. He steps back and says, that's good.
It's good, yeah.
He creates man, and he says,
it's good.
Actually, he says it's not good. It's not good that man be alone. And he creates woman, and then he says, steps back and looks at everything that he's now made and says, that's
very good.
That's very good. Except there's not adjectives or adverbs in Hebrew. And so you can't say very good, although our Bibles translate that way. There's an intensifier before the word. And it'd literally be like saying this, and that's good. That's good.
Good.
Or that's great good. That was mighty, except mighty's an adverb. That was might good. That was power good. That's good. And so doubly good. And I don't know. Here's where I'm going to
start saying that. That's going to be my new thing.
That's good. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
We never find love. God's love. Never. There is one word we find not only in duplicate, but we find in triplicate in the Bible. And this is probably where you're going with this. Right? You know what? Triplicate? Holy. The word holy means completely other, completely different. And God is a holy God, pure. We've got to be holy. And the problem is, that's God. He's completely holy. He can't just look at sin and wink at sin. He's holy. He can't even tolerate sin in its mildest form. There's a third word you need to know about God. God is also just. The word just, it's the word from which we get our word justice. We get our word judge from the same root. God is just. And in a court system, what's a judge supposed to do? In terms of what is justice?
He's supposed to be fair. He's supposed to punish when people do wrong and reward when...
Okay, so reward righteousness and punish bad behavior. Wow. You see, if God is just, God actually has to punish sin and reward righteousness. And that's what a good judge is. So understand this about God. Here's all you need to know. God is love, but he's not only love. God is also holy, completely pure. He's also just. He must punish sin even in its mildest form. Well, that creates a problem when we go to our second category, and you take your napkin and you can go down here or wherever you're writing, and you can put the word man. We know what God's like. What about man? And here's what we know about man. We know man was created good, but we sinned. In fact, we became sinful, and Romans 3 tells us that. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's no one who seeks God. There's no one who understands. We understand that there's no one righteous, not even one. We've all turned our own way, gone our own way. See, no one is righteous. We're all sinners, and we know that. In fact, we could stop and ask. I just wondered this. How many times do you think we sin a day? And that's a hard thing, but understand there are sins of commission, the Catholic Church says. Things we sin, and so we do something that's wrong. But there's also sins of omission, things we should do that we don't do. And so, Scott,
I'd like for once to be the guy asking the question and you having to answer the question.
Okay,
So, how many times a day do you imagine you sin?
Oh, man. Me?
Pastor Steve Crane.
Let's talk about Scott. Let's
just grab a number. Just throw a number out there.
Let's say we're all good people and we sin 3 times a day. Okay? 3 times 365, that's 1,090, 85, 90. We're better on Sundays. Let's say 1,000 times a year.
Round it, yeah.
Round it off to 1,000. And Scott happens to be, how old are you?
I'm 42.
42. And so math's not really good, but 42 times 1,000, 42,000. And so here's what I want you to do. We're going to pretend for a second that sins are traffic tickets. And God is Judge Judy. And Scott, you're standing before Judge Judy, and you've got 42,000 traffic tickets. And I want to know, what can you expect?
I'm toast.
From Judge Judy. She's going to have a tizzy fit.
Yeah.
But you need to understand something, that sins are not traffic tickets. Sins are actually direct violation of the very nature of God. And God is not Judge Judy. And here's what we understand. The wages of sin is death. God has to punish sin. And so we know not only is man sinful, but the wages of sin is death. We're deserving of death. Now, thanatos, it can be literal death, or also can be separation from God. And that's what he's talking about, that sin separates you from God. Even one sin, a completely holy, perfect God, even one sin separates you. But see, we're deserving of death. That's our punishment. And you need to understand that biblically, we're helpless. Man is sinful, deserving of death. We're helpless. All of us have become like one who's unclean. All our righteous acts are like filthy rags. And so the truth of the matter is, we're sinners, God's sinless. We're sinners, God's judge. And that should scare some people.
Well, just talking through this, when you describe man as sinful, we're deserving of death, we're helpless, and you just described God as loving yet intolerant of sin because he's holy and just, fair. I don't know that we really want God to be fair.
Yeah, you've heard people point their finger at God and say, God, that's not fair. And I'd simply ask you, do you really want God to be fair
I don't want him to be fair.
with you? I don't. You see, God must punish sin, and we're sinners. We're deserving of death. If you want God to be fair with you, that means condemnation. That means you're guilty. That means separation from God. That's not very good news. But you come to the third quadrant in your paper. Understand, God is love, but he's also holy, he's also just. We understand man, he's sinful, he's dead, he's helpless. But here's the solution that comes in Jesus Christ. And to really understand the gospel message, again, you need to know three things. The first thing is vitally important, or nothing else works. You need to understand that Jesus is God's son. And we know that. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten. The word only begotten is the word monogenos in Greek. It means the only one of a kind. He's the only one like that. He's the one and only Son of God. And so we understand that Jesus is God's son. You can read John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jump down to verse 14, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, beheld his glory, the glory of the one and only. Again, the same word, the monogenos, the only one of a kind there. And so the first thing you need to know about Jesus is God's son. God, son, come to earth to live like a man. And that's important when we understand exactly what he does, because Jesus comes to be our substitute. You see, the wages of sin is, you can finish that, death. Wages of sin is death. Jesus comes to pay the punishment. Why? Because God has to punish sin. He's a good judge. So there's a sin, it's got to be punished. He punishes the sin, and Jesus becomes our substitute. We reread in 1 Peter, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds, we've been healed. Jesus actually takes our place. Jesus became man, and so he could die for us.
Well, here's an objection. You're sitting across the table from someone at Starbucks, and you're going through all this. It's a little confusing to suggest that this one guy, that Jesus, is able to be a substitute for all the millions, billions of people who have ever existed. You know, you can imagine one person being able to substitute for another person, but
that's why it's important we understand that Jesus was God's son, not just a man. You see, if he was just a man and he was a great, perfect person, Scott could maybe come and die in the place of